Hi, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all and see familiar faces I haven't seen for a while. Nice, great. Hi, Ha. We just talked, so we're good, right?
We're linked.
We've already said our hellos.
Hi, everyone. Judith, I'm so glad you made it.
Thank you. I am on a shitty camera, but I'm here.
Yes.
Well, good to have you all here. This is being recorded because there's about 70 people who signed up for this. But being a smaller group, we'll be able to really have some good conversations. So that's rather than just chat questions and things like that, so we can get into it. So I'm going to start and kind of create the perspective and the focus of why we came together. Ha and I both have businesses. We've had businesses for a fairly long time. We're both in the bodywork world, and yet we have developed something very different. I started out as a conceptual artist that went into somatic work, what we call somatic work now, which was called human potential. Because I recognize that process or creativity was essential to life itself. And so I was curious about how, when my perception changes, what does that elicit? How do I see the world differently? How do I experience myself differently? So I was just curious. But I did end up writing a manual for my students because they asked me to, and I had never done anything like that. I have a high school education. I went to college at a school that would allow me to go in with very low average. I was never part of the school dynamic, and I flunked out. I went on to become a conceptual artist at the Boston Museum School of Fine Arts, not because I went to art school, but I worked with people who were fine artists. I mean, my whole life is made up of very strange occurrences that lead me somewhere else that I have no right to be, spaces that is like, what am I doing here? But I stirred the pot each time, and that's why I went into that school. I was asked to, create chaos, and so I did. I was the only woman in an all sculpture department of men. And I shared that position with a weaver who was also a woman, and we together created some really fun things. So my business model is not what you would call the dominant model. So when I started to write this manual, I had to learn a lot of things, like how to typeset and things like that, because there was no computers at the time. And how do you make something like that? So the way I've entered it has never been through studying something, accomplishing that, and then developing that as my profession. I'm not saying that that isn't a way to go. I'm just saying I've never been in that process or overview of what I would call the top-down model of where someone educates you, you get a good degree from that education, and then you're able and responsible enough to pass that on or to take that further. So I want to present the idea that having a business, which I've had now for over 45 years, a successful business, a business where I've had opportunities to travel various places in the world that I really wanted to travel and teach, to be published in international as well as the United States, and to have my books translated into various languages. I mean, all of that is kind of not any goal that I ever had. But nevertheless, I've been savvy enough, you could say, savvy enough to be able to create a life and create a good life. And the 10 years I spent in Lawrence, Kansas was an exceptional life. And I wrote my third book there. You know, it allowed me to buy a house. It allowed me to have, you know, a retirement plan. So these are not frivolous things. These are part of where I am now as an elder to, you know, how do I support myself for the rest of my life? So this started out in my late 20s, mid 20s, and grew into a very functional way of being. Now, I did have some wonderful support in the very beginning because I wasn't starting a business, but I lived very frugally. We lived on one income, raising our children. You know, we had a used car, we had used clothes. You know, I lived a very different lifestyle. So I put that up to all of you because it's a way of being that is different than how developing a business is formatted. The focus on the dominant business plan is cost. What does it cost? You make decisions around those costs, and you have a measurement of whether you're being successful or not. And I found this one quote I thought was really interesting. To me, this is like the ultimate kind of corporate view, is a firm's dominance is the measure of the power of a brand, product, service, or firm relative to competitive offerings, whereby the dominant firm can behave, this is a Google search, can behave independent of their competitors or consumers, or consumers, and without concern for resource allocation. So that is the dominant paradigm of a business. So when you're a small business owner, you often look to, well, how were people successful? How did they grow these businesses? And in that perspective, there's also the idea of having certain capacity to run a functional business. I'm not challenging any of that. But I am starting to switch the conversation to the idea that what would it be to have a business that had a biodynamic basis? That means a living system. So we have to define what biodynamic means. And biodynamic is a word that evolved through the holistic, ecological, and ethical approaches to farming. And I don't know if he's the first person to ever use this word, but it's granted the work of the philosopher and scientist Rudolf Steiner. So in the 1924s is where that word evolved. For me, that word is how any indigenous culture works. So it's not a white man who invented it. He just brought something that the dominant culture never talked about, was the integration of science with the understanding and recognition of the spirit in nature. So there's a spirit or soul that he brought back to business of farming that was missing if you take that dominant profit margin perspective. And one of the features that's separate from things like organic farming, and I know this seems odd to be bringing farming into this, but I'll explain that in a minute, which is the principles are regenerative. And when you look at regenerative, it's really one of the markers is it's always about renewal. That means you're not always moving, progressing. There's something else going on in the process of developing your work or developing your business, growing a business. It's not always that it moves forward. Regenerative capacities are something that I think Ha and I will both be speaking to, of how we were able to let go of something, to allow something new to renew itself. And that may be us. So that's the other piece, is how do you play into the business? The personal capacity for you to be evolving in yourself is what a good business is. Otherwise, it's separate from you. It's not part of you. And that's part of the integrating piece. That is principles of biodynamic approach to anything, which is, how do I play a part in this? How does nature play a part in this? The resourcing. I mean, you could even say things like, people say, well, are you going to write another book? And I said, no, why would I do that? I've said everything I want to say. But in good business models, I'm delayed. I should be publishing another book. If you watch publishers and you watch people who write books, they just keep writing books. They reiterate what they said in a new format. Why? Because we as consumers go, well, that was written in 2019. There must be something new to read now. And so we see how the dominant culture defines also your own business capacity to be relevant, to stay relevant. How do you stay relevant if everybody's wanting to consume something and it has to be new and fresh and, you know, whatever, the hottest item. So you see how there's a insidiousness of consumption that's based on a business model. You need people to keep consuming whatever it is you're offering. And that may go against the grain of what you actually are interested in developing. And I think some of the finest people I know in the business world have often let something go because they were done with it. And they felt the urgency in their own development to move on from there. That takes a lot of courage when you have something that people know you do, and then you don't want to do it anymore. But we'll talk about those kind of things. And then the creating of a living context, which allows all aspects of my life and my relationship with the earth to thrive. So me writing another book, do I really need to cut down more trees? I mean, really, you know, to talk about Psoas? I mean, is that really relevant? I don't think so. I think that I have a website that has 45 years of every aspect you could think of wanting to pursue Psoas. So how then can I creatively redistribute that? Would be the creative piece of my business. How do I take material that was written on trauma in 20 years ago with David Purcelli, for example, as a person who's very relevant right now because there's so much trauma. He's like up there. Everybody kind of knows of him, or Stephen Porges, you know, as a researcher. How do we take these ideas of somebody who has now, whose work is pertinent? He and I wrote articles about trauma 20 years ago. You know, those articles are still exactly the same thing that's relevant today, and yet they were published 20 years ago. So, you know, this is how we renew. This is how we regenerate. How do we take what we're doing in our, that is pertinent to people, but is also relevant to ourselves and feels ethical in our choices of how we live our life. So that's what we wanted to talk about. And I love that Ha has accepted my invitation because she's a phenomenal therapist and educator and CEO, and has done amazing work. So Ha, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because this is a conversation we're having, and tell people a little bit about the beginning for you and how this, you know, kind of slowly evolved into or quickly evolved into what you're doing today?
Hi, everyone. Liz, thank you so much. It's such an honor. It's been I think a lifetime of finding oneself and continuing to find oneself. My story is one of immigration, and it is very much woven into, to use Liz's language, into the concepts of body work and mindfulness that I have started to create within my own life. And really, it's a calling, I think, that I just started to listen to. For me, growing up in the United States as a brown young girl, it was confusing and still is quite confusing to really embody self in a landscape where it is discombobulated. And I think for me, going to body, and like Liz, it was in my mid-20s. I was a young mom. I was going through a divorce. That I started to discover some of my lineage-based ancestry, which I did a really good job ignoring all throughout my just upbringing. In that regard, it was a landing that I felt that really sensed a rightness, and whatever that is for you, for me, it was just it was like the smell was right in the room at the moment. And I just knew that there was something there. And so it started with post-college, not being able to locate in college. Like Liz, I went to, a community college. I was in the South Bay in LA, and I was studying theater, I was studying dance, I was studying voice, and I thought maybe education, maybe, I don't know, maybe I would go into production, maybe I just didn't know, but nothing like took my heart and just held it the way that body work did. When I experienced body work, there was something there that said, yes. And then it continued to say yes. And so it was clear to me, I really wanted to go to Chinese medicine school, but I couldn't afford it. And I was just too maybe embarrassed to ask. I was like, I won't ask for this big loan to go do this thing that maybe I want to do. And later I found out that my great-grandfather was a Chinese medicine man in the village that I came from. And so it just, it was an unfolding over time and a sensing of rightness, which rightness in my terminology was a resting place for my soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You became a shiatsu practitioner, which is based on Chinese medicine. Yeah. And then you had an impulse to do something different. You had a full clientele.
I did.
Yeah, you left a full clientele to go do something else. So
I had broken up with
tell us a little bit. I mean, because that's the pinnacle of a massage therapist. Is you don't have to be looking for new clients. You're turning people away. That's the ultimate goal, right?
And it continues.
Yes.
Yeah, I was completely booked a year in advance with a wait list, and I decided that I had been going to like conferences and going and you have to do your CEUs for your license. And so you go to all these different, classes. And if you're the type of therapist who's like, I'm just going to study local because I don't want to put my finances into like that extra. I was always the latter. I'm going to invest in me and go travel somewhere interesting and go study with someone that, just kind of pinged my soul. And so I would end up in like New Mexico. I would go to New York. That's where I met you. I would go, to different places, California, and meet these individuals. Well, this one happened to be NIH supported, and it was research supported, and it was, Sloan Kettering. It was all the heavyweights of the medical industry marrying with holistic health. So at that time, it was called CAM, complementary alternative medicine. And so this is, 15 years ago. And I sat in that conference, and these were like research scientists, PhDs, MDs, I was just running to keep up. I was like, I just really was so curious, like, what is this thing that they're talking about? Of course, I was already stooped in the world of like essential oils and, sound healing and, pressure point therapy and acupuncture. These sorts of things were like my language, but they were marrying research with proving that these mechanisms would work in a controlled setting and treatment of cancer. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting stuff. This is integrating at a level that I hadn't really thought of. And that's where the seed happened. It was very much that conference.
Yeah. So you started Ha.Le Integrative Center, and you got yourself a physician and an acupuncturist.
Yes.
And you set up an entire center.
I did.
The CEO of the center, and took insurance. And how many? And you're still doing that, but you've evolved further.
I have.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about where that evolved to, because I think that's phenomenal to think of yourself as a shiatsu practitioner and then say, "Ooh, I could do something even." I mean, that was something you even saw as a could I create? So you do see vision in that way. I don't. We were talking about that. I'm not a visionary at all. I just, I'm very somatic. So it's just one thing. It's a momentary event here. I don't project, but you actually saw something that you could actually use as a model for other people as well.
And Liz, I think that's interesting because I think in your sensing of, and I can imagine what that would be, but I would love for you to articulate that more. Like what in that sensing of like pulling, it's like pulling something in, because for me, I don't like see the full picture at all. And there are times when I'm just completely blinded. Like I have no idea. And so I have to tap into that sensory system. But I would love to hear more about that from you. And to answer your question, yes, I brought in a physician. He approached me. I had like wished for him. Dr. Birdie, who was this phenomenal research scientist and, double MD, whatever that means. Like, it just means that he could see children, he could see adults. So he's done the like extra education, and he was leaving Vanderbilt University, leaving his research position and really kind of tired of the medical model. And he approached me. I had reached out to him, but he was just so busy. He never had time to like meet with me. And finally, he was making this transition, and he thought, well, this will be a good place to land. And so the answer was yes, absolutely. Come on board, let's play. Let's start like integrating. And I'm this novice, very passionate, interested young woman. Maybe I wasn't so young at that time, but I was middle-aged. And what was interesting to me is, can a small business, can an individual business carry forth the weaving of different holistic systems together for an individual and take insurance? And the answer is yes, all day long. And really figuring out at that time, and he was really instrumental in figuring out a formula of care. And that doesn't mean that was formulaic in that, like, we're going to apply this, this, and this, and then we're going to get this result, but rather that it was like a recipe. We're going to have these ingredients, and we're going to get these results. And we got results. With that said, Dr. Burdee was the first physician to come on board, and the pandemic hit, and he had to make some decisions for his economics. Perfectly understandable. Then came two other physicians, one of them a neurologist, both from Walter Reed. And so these honorable mentions of these places, these sort of Ivy League, or, the ivory tower of, like, medical field, I was like, wow, I mean, just sort of surprised and also really honored and willing to take the risk, because there is risk involved in, like, onboarding and engaging with anyone, but particularly with physicians. They carry a really heavy load of malpractice insurance. And so that I took that burden on to help cover that, which was a financial burden for the company, in order to have these highfalutin people on board. Fast forward, what I've learned, Liz, is that it is not necessary.
So you kind of came full circle after that conference of realizing that actually they need to pull in what we call alternative traditional systems of health into the medical world, rather than the other way around, in a certain way.
Yes.
In terms of the burden of proof.
Yes, absolutely.
Or the burden of care.
Yes.
But what I really find is how courageous you were, because you hadn't gone to business school. You hadn't, so that's where we interface in some really interesting ways. I got to work for a physician, which is also a weird thing, because I have no licensing at all. Okay. I mean, I'm not a therapist. I've never have been a therapist. I'm an educator. But I ended up in San Francisco Hospital in an alternative healthcare unit in the late 70s, run by Dr. Dorothy Waddell. And she was an MD who created what you wanted to create, which is bringing all these different modalities. We had an amazing, homeopathist. He's one of, like, the classics. And we had the Chinese medicine, and we had me doing acupressure and Psoas work, because I did go only because I fell in love with her. And I figured I didn't care what she was teaching. I was going to go hang out with her. So the only way to hang out with her was to go take classes with her. So I learned how to become an acupressurist, but which I love. And but the interesting thing here is that she ran the kind of clinic you wanted, but the hospital was the overseer of it. And so she had a clinic within the hospital. And the way the hospital saw it is, we're going to dump everybody we don't know what to do with in that center, and they'll deal with them, because they couldn't diagnose them. They couldn't understand what was, they couldn't give them a pharmaceutical. There was nothing they could offer them. So they would shove these people Vietnam vets and all kinds of interesting humans that I got to work with that I probably wouldn't have met on the street. I wouldn't have met in my life. That taught me so much about the core of their being and what was really, I was just hanging out and learning tons from these people. So that's an interesting, somebody else was holding what you as an individual person was holding for an entire center. And I
Yes.
think it's phenomenal that you took that on, that you had the audaciousness to say, I can do this. I can take on your insurance and your, but you did create that model. It did work for a while. It was beautiful. COVID shifted all of that. Yeah. And
yeah, COVID shifted everyone's life, and being a high touch clinic, we were definitely impacted greatly. Not only did it shift the tectonic, platelets of the company itself, because the company is based on the individuals, the practitioners who come forward. And what I have learned over time is that there's a lot of flexibility that is needed in order to hold space, in order to hold the scaffolding of a business with lots of different practitioners, particularly wellness practitioners. We are a bunch of misfits that like a lot of different things, and we like to follow our noses wherever we want to go. If the wind blows, I've had people, really honored. Everyone loves being a part of Ha.Le. I loved being and still continue to be, at its helm. And it is absolutely an awesome thing to witness people have babies and to witness people buy homes because they've been able to sustain themselves through work at Ha.Le. Also to have people get the, inspiration to join a Zen center and, decide for a different type of lifestyle. So these sorts of things are the things that, it's just, it
employees. Yeah, you have employees. As running a business, it's an interesting thing to hold all of that. Yeah.
I used to be really mad about it. I would just get so because I would take it personally. But I've had to work a lot about it's not personal.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's a really because a lot of businesses have the setup is that you have to adapt to what my system is versus you're actually holding, like, I feel like you're the mother hen or something, and you're holding all these little chickies, under your wings, and some are going to eventually skirt out and do these other things, and others are going to come in. But it's different than having a construct in which you show up at a certain time, you leave at a certain time. And for most people who have jobs like that, they make sacrifices around their creativity, around their family, around, it's an either or, it becomes a very either or.
Liz, I don't want to work in a place like that.
No, I know, neither do I.
Why would I invite people? Why would I?
We're both entrepreneurs, so we don't want to work in a place like that. We've been there, done that. Let me say something to lead into a couple of questions. We're going to open it up to everybody, but I want to go into this a little deeper around some of these ways that we have both mutually handled working in a biodynamic, because that's what we're talking about. You're talking about, the regenerativeness of even the staff that you have. You're talking, we don't call it turnover. You're actually saying, no, people come, people go. This is a moving organism. That Ha.Le is a living system. And you're working with these premise that you need to be responsive. So we want to cover some of those pieces. And before I do that, I want to share that one of the things that Ha and I share is that we're both daughters of women who grew up on farms. So that's the connection between biodynamic farming and our mothers. Not that their farms were necessarily that way, but traditional farms were that way. You used everything on the farm, and you renewed, and it was self-sustaining. You couldn't afford to go someplace else and get what you needed. You had to create that. So, Ha.Le, as she said, was born in Vietnam, and your mom was Vietnamese, and your dad was a U.S. serviceman, and they fell in love, and you got born. And I want you to speak to the fact that your birth name is Ha, and when you were brought here, I think the integration of your vision of Ha.Le is part of your roots. But your American name that when you came here was Janice Cathey. And that's how you identified yourself, as a functional CEO, whether you want to call it that or not, but the head of an organization, and working with these physicians and working with clients and stuff. And recently you've begun to some things are changing. So speak about how that's changing for you, because I think it's profound. Because I feel like that's really where your authenticity is emerging now in this phase of your life.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to back up, because there was something that you asked that I want to speak to, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But I looked up biodynamic, and the Latin word means to bring forth again. Mm-hmm. And so that I think is very much a part of calling in my birth name, is to bring forth again a lineage-based or something within me. It doesn't even have to be lineage-based. And I don't farm. My mom farmed and had to farm in order to survive.
She grew up on a farm. She grew up on a farm. And so
yes.
Mom. Yeah. And she didn't farm either as an adult woman. But there's something about that lineage of knowing the earth that I think is an essence that we both carry through our work, through our work, that ability to do something regenerative.
Absolutely.
It's in our bones, I want to say.
It has bones.
Yeah.
Yes, it has absolute structure to it, and to tap into that. And it's been a long time in coming. It's not something that happened overnight. And I think that's been really a big piece of the medicine for me in business ownership and CEO, or not, or you can call me what you will, but a CEO just means that I make a lot of decisions on the daily. I make a lot of decisions, and I'm not always sure if the decision is right, but what I am damn sure of is that I'll make more decisions if it's not right. And so you just continue to generate decisions. It's like digging in the dirt. You're just going to continue to dig and to plant and to nourish this seedling or whatever it is that you're putting in. And over Mother's Day, my mom had me fertilize her plants, some of her vegetables that and I've never fertilized her plants. She does it all the time. And so just the act of bringing in chicken shit and soil and mixing it with my hands,
a little chicken shit in our lives.
and taking it out to the plants, that I was so touched by the act and that realization that is essentially what I'm doing in business. and what I'm doing with my name as well. It's a calling forth. You're nourishing the seed to call forth its possibility.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly what Ha is going to, do, but what I do know is that she wants to continually show up authentically.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Well, this lineage touches the way we grow businesses, because one of the things I wanted to talk about was goals versus process. And, I was thinking about that today, of how businesses, when you look up, how to run a business, how to create it, you have to have some goals, right? And I think that's such a isolating and individuating idea, because even though I work for myself and I have had employees come in, I've hired people to help me run my office. I don't have a system. I don't have a center. And yet, I don't have this plan that has to take forth. So there's the goals versus process for me, and I would like to hear what you perceive that is, if you have goals, is that I want to be open to what shows up. So if I have a goal, that's setting something, an intention, and I'm not against intentions, but at the same time, they limit possibilities. They limit what wants to show up. So one of the things I've learned in many years of gardening, because I do garden a lot, landscape, is what shows up wherever, and welcoming it, and welcome that I am not in control of this land. It's not my land, whether I so-called own it or not. I'm interacting with life, with all of life, with this kin we call plants, that to me are as essential and important as I am. So I have done a lot of decolonizing in my garden by recognizing the way I've been taught in the system of, oh, well, this is a weed and that isn't. And the choices I make